On this episode, we're going to do something a little bit different. I wanted Sean to join me to kind of go over the argument for Bigfoot. Recently on the interwebs, I ran across someone posing the question, is there any evidence of Bigfoot existing other than large footprints? I thought, hey, let's tackle the question.
Well, but it is a fair question to ask. If we break it down to its core, there's some meat on that proverbial bone.
This is Bigfoot Crossroads. My name is Matt, and joining me is Mr. Sean Forker of the Sasquatch Experience. On this episode, we're going to do something a little bit different. I wanted Sean to join me to kind of go over the argument for Bigfoot. Recently on the interwebs, I ran across someone posing the question, is there any evidence of Bigfoot existing other than large footprints? Now, you'll notice I had a little tone in my voice whenever I said that, Sean, and that's because I know you can't always interpret tone and inflection over the internet in a text posting, but this came across as one of those questions of like, is Bigfoot even real? So, I thought, hey, let's tackle the question.
You got to read it in that voice. That voice pings just as you read it is how I heard it in my head. That kind of pedantic, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? Seriously unserious way of asking a question.
Yeah, kind of a backhanded comment.
Yeah, that's it. The backhanded compliment. Like, yeah, is Bigfoot real?
Yeah.
Besides footprints? Well, but it is a fair question to ask. If we break it down to its core, there's some meat on that proverbial bone.
For sure. And I mean, whenever we're talking about Bigfoot, a lot of times we use the word skeptic. Now, skeptic, to me, isn't necessarily a negative thing.
Right.
It's how you should approach most subjects, especially of this nature. But in the Bigfoot world, skeptic has also kind of become the title to a person who is just extremely condescending, shoots down all evidence, and just doesn't think Bigfoot exists. They think that everyone who says they saw a Bigfoot is either lying or mistaken.
The jaded one.
Yeah. And being a Bigfoot witness myself, and also coming from the researcher/investigator background, I understand it, but it still stings a little, man. It still stings a little. So whenever I see someone ask the question, is there any evidence of Bigfoot existing other than just these large footprints that we find? It's like a call to action for me, man. I want to stand up for Bigfoot and let the people know what the evidence actually is out there.
It's the second most annoying question for me. The first most annoying question is there more than one?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
What the hell do you think? Yes, there's more than one. What kind of a moron even asks that question?
Calling myself a Bigfoot researcher, I'm no longer a field investigator. You still go out and, look for physical evidence and everything. You're still very active as an investigator. But let's be honest here. It's not something that has any requirements to be one other than just the act of going and doing it, calling yourself one, so to speak.
Right. There's no degree you can get in Bigfootology, cryptozoology. You can get one on the internet. And of course, there's those pretend classes you can take that make you feel special. But at the end of the day, there's no serious credentials you can get that allow you to call yourself an investigator or researcher. I think as with all things, it's about the level of practice you put into it. Right. And the amount of time you spend. Of course, people say if you spend longer than X amount of years, you're considered an expert. We all know that's the third rail of Bigfooting. Nobody ever calls themselves an expert. But you can be an expert in subjects that allow you to enhance kind of your CV of Bigfoot research. Like anybody that's in law enforcement or has particular set of skills for forensics or evidence collection, that all builds to a good resume. But at the end of the day, allows you to be an expert in a part of the mystery, not the overall arching mystery, like Dr. Meldrum.
Right.
He's got a PhD in anatomy and physiology, right? But at the end of it, it's not in Bigfoot
Right.
because there's still no real type specimen to base that off of. It's all still, I don't want to call it a pseudoscience, but it's a form of citizen scientry that I think we're all trying to establish as something a little bit more than.
It definitely overlaps into, credible scientific areas of study. And that's why I think it draws the interest of some scientists every once in a while. But I mean, let's face it, whenever you're talking about just Bigfoot in general, if, Joe Blow is interested in the subject or saw something on TV about it, they're going to run to the internet and, they're going to look up Bigfoot or whatever. And that's going to lead them down the rabbit hole, so to speak. And eventually they're going to find the Bigfoot community. And as soon as you start asking questions and stuff, I mean, you don't get a lot of people just running across the path of Dr. Jeff Meldrum. You get anybody and everybody answering with whatever they think, whatever they've heard. And so a lot of the evidence, in my opinion, the good stuff, may have been buried over the years, just underneath the pile of crabs in the bucket.
To your point, folks run into the lowest common denominator and the most popular version of researcher that's out there on the internet, whose Facebook page has a few thousand followers, and people, oh my gosh, they're hot stuff. They got all these followers. Yeah, there were followers at Jonestown too.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the truth. Yeah,
right. And, don't base upon that. I think this is one of those hard areas that there's information out there, but it's not all good information. And there are people out there that are far more personality than they are brain, and that's dangerous too. There's no real vetting, and there's no real peer reviewing, and there's no real science behind things that they will tell you are the absolute truth. That's where I get alarmed, Matt, is when you start hearing folks talk about these things as absolutes. At the end of the day, boys and girls, guess what? No Bigfoot body, no Bigfoot for real.
Right. A lot of my friends, you're included in my group of friends for sure, but you're not necessarily like this. You and I speak absolutely candidly to one another in private.
Right.
But, sometimes I have to vent a little bit on social media or whatever, and I'll say something and I'll leave names out, or I'll talk about something on the show and I'll leave names out, because I'm not trying to go after the person in particular as much as just whatever they might be doing or the evidence that they're putting out. But I can tell you right now, matter of factly, that there are people out there who are well known and well established in the Bigfoot research community, not just the Bigfoot content creation community, that are just putting out absolute garbage just to get followers, just to get popular, just to get asked to speak at conferences. And I mean, I've seen one individual that I don't know him personally. I know that he is extremely well respected and well liked in the Bigfoot world. And I saw part of his presentation that he was giving at a conference where he's putting up these exclusive images, from a trail camera that he's, received from a person, an anonymous tip or whatever. Nobody's ever seen these photographs before. This is an exclusive. And I'm looking at it and I'm just like, yeah, that's the first result in a Google image search for Bigfoot costume. I mean, easily recognizable. And there's no way that this guy doesn't know that.
No. And how many times have we been down that road over the years? You and I have the benefit of long-term history, right? Over 20 years of this stuff coming and going. Does that make us an authority? No, it makes us educated on the topic and allows us to go back and draw on those. Because every time a new picture comes up, I could message you and say, Matt, where have we seen this before?
Yeah.
We've seen this before. There is very little out there that hasn't been recycled in some way, shape, or form. And the problem is it's never very good, but you get people that hold on to that hope. It makes it viral again. It blows it up. And then we have to deal with the same crap we dealt with 15, 20 years ago over the same photograph that nobody wants to go and do any research on.
Well, people will believe the story and they'll just automatically assume that certain things mean certain things. And what I mean, there's a group of photos in particular. These photos were manufactured by an artist who was doing sort of a viral guerrilla marketing campaign for an upcoming gallery exhibit that he was putting on in Seattle, I think, where he created all these Bigfoot. It was the Beacon Bigfoot, Beacon, New York. Had a website and everything. Multiple clear photos of Bigfoot. Now, he had taken mannequins and used polymer clays to kind of sculpt them out and put hair on them and make them look somewhat lifelike. But he's been very transparent about this. And you could see the same exact figures in the art gallery. So it wasn't like hidden or anything. But people from the Bigfoot world, for whatever reason, have grabbed some of these images and put them on the internet and attached stories to them, or not attached stories to them, just presented them as like, we don't know where they came from. And you see these photos pop up every year, multiple times, and it's been going on for like 10 years now. One in particular is of a small juvenile, only about 3 feet tall, and in the photo, it's standing close to 2 deer that are looking at it. Well, deer wouldn't be standing that close to a human, Sean, so it must be real. And that's what people think. They don't understand that, well, deer will stand close to humans if they're being fed by humans. Deer will stand close to a mannequin sitting out in the woods that has corn around its feet. This doesn't necessarily make it real.
If there's no perceived threat, it's not going to run.
Right. And if you try to explain the background, I mean, how often should you have to do that? Is it your job every time you see these photos to go in depth and like find all the links and do all the no, nobody wants to go through all that. And so like maybe every now and then I'll just see it enough that I'll actually stop and leave a comment saying, hey, this is a fake. Well, then I get questioned. Prove that it's fake. And that's just ridiculous.
Why is it always on the burden of the person saying it's a fake? Like there's obviously a reason for you to say it's fake. I believe it's fake because of this. Okay, I'm not the one saying it's real. I can clearly tell you that's fake because I see a mask, I see baggy arms. You could have some of the absolute worst costumes out there posed in a provocative way in the woods that would make people think it's a Sasquatch. I don't mean provocative like Playgirl, or Playboy. I mean provocative as in like, the Patterson pose or what have you, and people will believe it's a Bigfoot, and it could be the absolute worst image ever. But people will fight you tooth and nail. I can't talk to me. That it is in fact a real Bigfoot, knowingly 100% it's not. And that's where we've come to, that lack of being able to really discern what's fake and what's reality. And the problem is that's entering its way into many different realms of our lives now, not just Bigfoot, but it's very hard. It's like all of a sudden we have a whole, I don't want to say generation, but a whole mass of people that lost the ability to critically think.
Or they're just too lazy to do so. They want somebody else to do it for them, and they've picked a person or a group of persons to get their information from, and they just believe whatever that person happens to say.
Right. And I get a little salty over it because I hate repeating myself. So when I have to go and start bringing up topics and rehashing topics we've talked about 20 years ago, I get really frustrated. It was not long ago. I was lying in bed. It's like 2 o'clock in the morning, and my phone's dinging off with some person I've never met before messaging me because they've listened to the podcast, wanting to know what I think about this. And my response to them was kind of rude. It was, read a damn book.
Yeah, do the work.
You know, all this stuff you're asking me about is in all the literature that's been written on this subject. Go read a damn book and leave me alone. And don't talk to me again until you've read it. Like, it's not hard. Like, you come to us wanting information. When we tell you where to get it, go do it. It's that simple. We had to.
Exactly.
John Green wasn't narrating his books for us.
No, not at all. And John Green wasn't going on the internet and just copying and pasting stories to his database either.
Right. And that's the other problem is like there's a lot of a problem that I've seen is that just taking a story for what it is and posting it out there. And if you're somebody that's looking for real data, and yes, I know I say that tongue in cheek because all of it has the potential to be BS, right? But if you're looking at it to form real data pools, you're purposefully contaminating that now. And you're making it far less of a resource and far less of a reliable situation to gather information from.
Well, let's get things kicked off with this list of evidence that I have provided other than large footprints. And at the top of that list, I just wanted to go ahead and get it over with. And it was actually something that I ran across again today. You always run across it. The Patterson-Gimlin film. 1967. 57 years old.
We're never going to know, are we?
We're never going to know.
No. Think of all the studies that have been done on it and all the recreations that have been attempted. And it wasn't even until recent, but we actually found the actual film site.
Right.
So, like, not you and I found it, but folks found it, you know, the Bluff Creek Project. I just think that, and honestly, here's another conversation we had almost 20 years ago. Does it matter anymore? I don't base my belief on Bigfoot or my foundation of Bigfoot evidence on the Patterson film at all.
Me either.
I think it's a great piece of a film to have and a good part of the lore of Bigfoot, but it shows nothing that is tangible today. That video, I don't think, convinces anybody anymore of anything besides what people want to think on both sides of the aisle. You either look at it and see it's a hoax, or you look at it and you think it's the real deal. But there's nothing we can do to show you either way.
Here's why I have it listed as a piece of evidence. Simply because we're now approaching 60 years and it's still being debated. It has never been proven one way or the other.
It's never been debunked, right? It's never, and I think that's the tell in it is that it's not been debunked.
Right.
Like none of the recreations have been good enough. The issue I have with it as being evidence is that evidence is usually in the support of something, and this doesn't really support anything. Like, to me, definitively, you can't look at it and say 100% that's an ape or that's a Bigfoot or 100% that's a hoax. That's the problem I have with it being evidence. I think it's a support structure. I just don't think, to me, it's good enough to call evidence.
Okay, but look at it from this perspective. We weren't around when it happened.
Nope.
Neither was the internet, in fairness, but there were people that were communicating, that were investigating Bigfoot. I mean, that was how it got filmed. They were going out trying to film a documentary on Bigfoot. And there were people like Bob Titmus. I never knew the guy, obviously, but according to everything I was told by other people who did know him, he was a good tracker. He knew what he was doing, and he tracked the Patterson creature from the film site into areas where it was not filmed, followed the tracks for quite a ways. So there are plaster casts from the track site, you know, that they were able to find the actual location. Like you said, they've done 3D scans to line everything up to figure out the height of Patty, you know, which is also debated still to this day.
Right. 7 feet, 6'3", like, you know,
which one is it?
But to the point that you're making, though, Bob Titmus followed tracks, but tracks of what?
Right.
And And that's where we start, sure, he did follow tracks. He did track them, but what were they? And that's where, and then you start getting into all the things you hear over the years, all the, well, it was, a put on by Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin, and Bob Gimlin's just kept it alive over all these years. Although it's a hell of a long time to tell a lie. That's all. And he hasn't done a lot of slipping up.
As researchers, you know that in the research community, sometimes things come out and people may put on faces and smile publicly, but behind closed doors, there's a lot of, what do you think about that? That doesn't feel right to me. That, well, he actually said this. And, you get a lot of that quiet information going on. I wonder what that information was at the time that this happened.
Right. But as we know over the years, the relationships between the four horsemen and the relationships between the researchers soured, that all of a sudden now you have some sort of, guided bias that's, clouding the story more. You know what I mean? Some of these guys just, for some reason, grew to hate each other. Does that hatred towards one another lend any kind of, well, so and so believes this, I can't believe it because he does.
Right.
And as petty as it is, you and I both know that the pettiness was a way of life for some of these guys.
Well, I told you that I ran across it again today, and what that is is that whole argument. So Bill Munns, famous Hollywood effects guy, did the most in-depth research and analysis on the Patterson film, along in coordination with many other people, including Jeff Meldrum, researching out this film, different aspects of it, from the camera to the possibility of it being a costume, et cetera, et cetera. And I ran across some postings by Bill on a cinematography forum where he was trying to get technical information about the camera that was used to film it. He was not bringing up Bigfoot. He was just asking questions about the camera to other film experts. And even there, the hate came forth. Here comes, one guy, why are you even talking about this? You're talking about a Bigfoot film that we all know is a hoax. This is just a hoax. Wasn't it Roger Patterson's friend in a suit? Didn't he come out and admit that? And that's what you get whenever you bring up the Patterson film still to this day. It's almost like the side against the Patterson film, the people that think that it's a hoax, the argument is so weak and so misguided. Like, sure, yeah, people have said that they were wearing a costume, Bob Hieronymus, but so have other people throughout history since this film has come out. There's been numerous people claiming they're the guy in the suit and getting their 5 minutes of fame.
They can't get the suit right. They can't even describe the suit they wore.
No.
Right. That's silly.
And a lot of the stories that you hear about it being a hoax are just internet rumor. It has no substance to it. There's nothing supporting it being a hoax other than so-and-so says so, which is just as bad.
If I was a person that was claiming to be the guy in the Patterson suit, you damn well better believe I'd remember every detail of that suit. I wore the most famous suit in history. I'm going to tell you I wore a diaper. I'm going to tell you I wore shoulder pads, and I'm going to know how many pieces it was and what it was made of, because it's important. Because at some point in time, that's going to be important.
I'm going to have lots of answers. And that's the problem. Right. We're most experienced with Bob Hieronymus claiming to be the guy in the suit, but Bob Hieronymus didn't have any answers. And his explanation for the suit was just utterly ridiculous. It doesn't look anything like what is in the Patterson film to me. I mean, he said like an old modified football helmet, one of the old leather football helmets. And that's not what I see in the film. I mean, could it be just all of our eyes playing tricks on us, and that's not really a muscle movement, and that's not really what it is? It is just Bob Hieronymus in a big monkey suit?
Well, it's always a potentiality, right?
Unfortunately. But the Patterson Gimlin film's not the only film footage out there.
It isn't. That's correct.
There have been other pieces of video footage. Not all were horrible. But unfortunately, whenever it comes to Bigfoot videos, you have two situations going on. You have the pre-internet days and the post-internet days. The pre-internet days, by the time copies of that video gets to the internet and gets posted on YouTube 1,000 times, it is of such horrible quality that there's no chance of making anything out, period.
Right. That's so true.
The stuff that's happened post-internet, there's so many people faking Bigfoot videos. There's so many people that are just, quite frankly, gullible to a Bigfoot costume, what's obviously a Bigfoot costume, that it just kind of muddies the waters for any good footage that does come out.
What about some people that have credentials and working in film and just go into videos and enhance them to pull out stuff that isn't there?
Well, yeah. And also, what about people that are involved in the film industry who, just for shits and giggles, make a fake video and put it out on the internet just to, show everybody what they can do?
That would never happen. Never.
Never in a million years.
Never.
And not everybody has to be in the film industry. I can get the same software that they get. I can learn the same skills to put out a fake Bigfoot video if I really wanted to. I don't want to, but it's possible. And there's people out there that do it. There's definitely amateur and hobby special effects guys that make fake internet videos all the time.
And they're just as good as the people working in Hollywood. Just
as good. There's a guy who was former military who's kind of part of leading the charge of the UFO disclosure movement. Again, won't mention any names, but this information isn't hard to find if you Google. And he recently came under fire after the Senate hearings because he was backing a photo that he had received from someone else that he trusted. And it was just like the reflection of a chandelier in a window.
Well, and that's where you start getting bought into it as so much yourself. You start losing your ability to be objective.
Yeah, your discernment.
And that's incredibly dangerous. And it's something that we all struggle with that have spent time in this field. I think there's at least one or two times I think we could all say we've probably been duped, Matt.
Oh, for sure.
Going pretty close down that rabbit hole, and then all of a sudden we're like, I don't know.
I was duped. I was part of a duping. Now, I exposed this duping, but myself and a gentleman, Steve Alcorn, who used to be pretty well known in the Bigfoot world for his fair looks at things, we got taken in by a guy from the paranormal community because he went through someone that we trusted, and he produced a photo that we did not have an explanation for. Steve met up with the guy, interviewed him in person. He had this amazing story, and we went ahead and put the photo out, which back in those days, and I'm sure it's still the same today, if you received a Bigfoot photo from someone, it was very iffy on whether you would actually post it publicly or not.
I was never a public poster of those things. And I'll tell you why, is because I always feared the backlash. And I didn't want to spend my days and nights fighting something I didn't have 100% validity over.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a time that we were sent game photos from a camera, a photo from a game camera, I should say, not game photos. And there was something in the photograph, but we couldn't discern what it was. Was it interesting? Very. But was it, would it convince somebody beyond a reasonable doubt? No, it wouldn't. And so we just sat on it. And now we don't even have permission to use it anymore because the guy who gave it to us has passed away. He never gave it to us. He just let us see him and hold on to him,
Yeah. Well, this guy his name was Norm Glasser, and he was prominent in the paranormal community. And he had sent us this photo, and like I said, had a story. Steve interviewed him in person, recorded it all on audio. The guy sounded legit. And so we went ahead and posted the photo, but we posted it under the pretense of, if anybody recognizes this, let us know. Because we're on the fence. We're not saying it is. We're not saying it isn't. We're just presenting what we've been told. And, of course, the Bigfoot community came through. It is the head of the Sugar Hill Flats monster that was on display in a little sideshow shop. This guy had gone and seen the head. It's just a paper mache head, just a sideshow gaff, basically, that was posted in the window of this little museum and curiosity shop. And he just took a picture of it through the window and then cropped the photo and sent it to us and said it was a Bigfoot looking at him through his car window.
But the power of the community is that you were able to get that quick.
Right. But if it hadn't been recognized, I mean, here we are. Now, of course, we exposed him, and then doing a little deep dive into his paranormal stuff, I found where he was hoaxing paranormal events and videos and everything else, and did my best to expose him and run him out of the community. I don't know if that worked or not, but here we are. But are there any Bigfoot videos that stand out in your mind over the years that you believe might be the real thing?
Oh, hells yeah. I still like the Freeman footage. The sad thing is, like, the quality of that over the years has not really been fantastic. I always liked that video. Just Paul Freeman's reaction, oh, there he goes, was always just so genuine to me. And being able to talk to Michael Freeman years ago when I did a show called The Nocturnal Journal, and Maz Adams and I were able to talk with Michael, and I always had an affinity. Never knew Paul, but I had an affinity towards him because I felt like he was somebody that got a bad rep. And he was somebody that was, really boots on the ground, spent a lot of time out there, maybe got a little excited over the stuff he found sometimes, but I just think he still had a true heart, and he was really a good down-to-earth guy, and I think his video is pretty top-notch. Again, I think there's more to that video that people have taken liberties with, but to me, when I think of that video, I think of that very large, bulky Bigfoot that just kind of saunters in front of the camera. And that's what it is. Not something picking something up and picking up a baby or any of that bullshit in my mind. Pardon me. I really think I go back to just the core of that first instance you see, oh, there he goes. That's the Freeman footage to me.
Yeah. I don't even know if people remember this, but the Danny Sweeten video.
Yeah. Bigfootville, every time I see it and they have that video of that, I was going to ask you about that one while we were talking. Because I don't know if I just have bad recall on it, but what was the deal on that video?
He was going and buying some land with a friend of his. They were going to buy a piece of property as a real estate investment type thing, I believe. And they might have wanted to buy some property for a gun range or something. I'm screwing up the story already. Bear with me. But
it's been a long time.
Yeah. So his buddy couldn't make it, so he went out there and took a video camera with him because he was filming the property to show his buddy since he couldn't make it. And he's walking around out there, and the story goes, he just kind of walks up on this creature that's like asleep, like taking a nap. It's like laying on the ground on its side. And whenever he saw it, it was like looking at him, and it's laying on its side, and he said it was kind of playing with its fingertips, like it was nervous, looking at him like it was thinking, like, what do I do? And he said just in a flash, like, he starts to pull the camera up, and this thing jumps up and punches him right in the chest and knocks him to the ground and takes off. And he gets back up and gets to his feet and gets the camera up, and you can see it walking off in the distance.
It's always a good piece of footage.
Yeah.
I mean, And again, we talk about video evidence, something we think to be credible. It's something I've always been fond of, but I don't have enough information to say, yeah, the hell yeah, that's the real deal. But it's a very exciting piece of footage nonetheless.
Well, there was some discrepancies, supposedly in the story and providing, like, whenever people started digging and everything, he mentioned about, I think, maybe having to have some dental work done, like the thing had popped him in the mouth or something. And then, couldn't provide dental receipts or something like that. There's, that sort of thing. And back then, this was in a period of time whenever tabloid television was really popular. And so you have like Current Affair and different TV shows reaching out to him, wanting him to, to pay him for the footage and tell his story and everything. That's where I heard about it as a kid. And I do think that he may have tried to fabricate some things after the fact. After kind of, you know what I mean? Like we've ran across this before where somebody gets a little taste, that celebrity, that limelight, and whenever it's gone, they still crave that attention or whatever.
Which was a lot harder back then.
Yeah.
It's not like today you could go viral. So,
right.
And in a second, this was a lot harder for people to get that notoriety. So it was a lot more attractive to try to get it.
Sure.
Is the point. Right.
And I think some people also did it just to kind of like, they didn't like people questioning them. They experienced a true event and they're wanting people to believe them so bad. They were like, well, okay, well, here's a track and here's more film, and it's just out of desperation, trying to validate a true experience they had. But at the end of the day, story aside, the Sweeten footage looked good to me. It always has.
Right. Right. The other problem is with people have a natural tendency to embellish to begin with. It's how we tell story, right? To make a story exciting. Sometimes you add more to it to make it a little bit more interesting or entertaining.
Right.
Doesn't mean the story's false. It just means that you took some liberties with it to make it a little bit more interesting. And, I always worry about that when I'm recounting my encounter story. I still go back to the core. Did that really happen? Or is that something I added to make it seem more? Because you tell a story for how long yourself, you get bored with it.
Oh, for sure.
Right. So you have to make sure you're kind of remaining to the integrity of the story and you're not, because that's all any diehard skeptic needs to do is, we changed the story about this or this details. Well, we're human. That's not true. We just, have just this natural tendency at times to try to make stories sound more exciting because you've got tired of telling it the same way for 20 years.
What do you think of the squeaky thermal footage?
Which one's this? Which one's the squeaky?
This is the thermal footage where it crawls up and takes a candy bar off of a tree stump.
Who took that footage?
I cannot tell you.
it's not the Michael Green footage.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is the Michael Green footage. North Carolina.
Yes, I think so. Because I'll tell you, I think that one, if we're talking about the same one, that one's pretty damn interesting to me because I think it's a lot harder to fake a thermal
mm-hmm.
than it is to fake an actual man in a suit. Only because you have layers you're trying to be able to maintain a bulkiness. Right. Synthetic fibers aren't going to radiate heat or trap heat the same way as the human body. Like you got to really layer and think. And to be able to produce that, the thermals are really harder to fabricate, and I really think there was something behind that squeaky footage.
Here's the thing with all the thermal videos that are out there. I mean, maybe there's some that I don't know about, but whenever you're talking about the squeaky footage, for instance, or the Stacy Brown footage,
which is another interesting one.
Yeah, it is either a Bigfoot or a hoax. It's not a misidentification.
No, and the Stacy Brown footage, I just think the limb proportions on that one make that, even though it's quick, make that stand out and kind of stand alone.
Mm-hmm.
It's fleeting, but it's still there enough to get a profile of it.
Well, again, the thermal image itself does not show a person wearing clothing. just because of the way that the heat's dispersed uniformly over the entire figure and everything. Like you were saying with synthetic fibers and everything, it doesn't really radiate heat the same way. And with that footage, it seems pretty uniform in heat signature to me. I would think that if it was somebody in a costume, it would appear entirely different, with like the hands glowing and around the feet glowing and the face glowing.
Yep. I concur with you on that. I think that's you couple that then with the proportions, that one's harder to dispel.
Right.
And that's what's going to be the key. Like, we've talked about evidence, and we've only even just gotten to film, but you start taking enough pieces of each one of these components, you can build a pretty good case study as to start proving that, maybe one piece of evidence does it, but the collective characteristics of these films and these pieces of evidence lead us to believe this, and this is why.
Right. It's the collection of all of this stuff.
Yep. The culmination of it all.
You can't just look at a single thing, because none of it will. I mean, you can talk your way out of anything, unless you physically see a Bigfoot do it, record the Bigfoot on video doing it, and then shoot the Bigfoot and drag in the body. There's always going to be a way to say, oh, that could have been something else. That wasn't a Bigfoot. This person's making it up, whatever.
Yes, James Baker, my research partner, my good friend, my best friend, and we were with Cliff Barackman at the bar in Salt Fork, and we were having a pretty spirited discussion around, this activity. And the guy kept saying, these trees, a Bigfoot did that. And Cliff goes, until I see a Bigfoot do it, we can't say that for sure.
Right.
We could say suspected activity or purported activity, but until we say it, you don't know a Bigfoot did that. Well, yes, I do. Well, no, you don't. You really don't. And until we prove it, none of us can really say that, right? We would like to think it is, but there's always that 1% chance we're all delusional.
Well, the next item on the list is one that has always held a special place for me, interest-wise, and that's vocalizations. Yeah, vocalizations, man. These are things that I've heard in person. They are things that I have recorded. I've heard other recordings. And I know for a fact that there are many vocalizations out there that have not been identified as anything known to exist.
Right. So we go to David Ellis. We go to Scott Nelson. We go to Stan Courtney, somebody who I don't think has got nearly enough credit in vocalization captures and collections.
Right.
These guys, Ron Moorhead, right? These guys are pretty much the forefront of the audio capturing of Sasquatch. I guess you got to put Matt Moneymaker on there because of the Ohio howl. But like nothing else makes noises like that. And David Ellis is slowly starting to prove that these things are at a different frequency and realm than the known animals that we know making these sounds. They're truly coming back as an unknown sound.
Well, Cornell University is probably one of the top universities on the planet for nature audio.
I hated Andy from The Office. I hated Andy. Sorry, Cornell. Sorry.
Touchy subject.
Oh, I hated him. Go ahead. Sorry. Digress.
But I know people personally who I've been to the location. I've been there when the recordings were happening, and they have sent these recordings to Cornell, and Cornell could not identify them as anything in their database. And this is like out in the woods in Texas. So how difficult can it really be? So at the very least, Bigfooters have captured audio of vocalizations of creatures that are either undocumented or the creatures are documented and these particular vocalizations have never been documented.
Right. I recorded some sounds in Keystone Forest in Pennsylvania. And if you go watch one of the Small Town Monsters documentaries, they actually play it. And it's actually me going back and forth with something. At first, I had to be careful that it wasn't my echo across this lake or this body of water that's there. But it's clearly intelligent. It's going back and forth with me. In fact, my buddy Chuck, you can hear in the recording saying he likes you, and as this thing and I are vocalizing back and forth. And the one time I listened to my research partner Ernie at the time, I go, "Why the hell is there a cow in the woods?" He had this very kind of sound to it, right? That was so unusual, but it kept interacting with me to the point where I was making more gorilla type sounds and it was coming back at me with them.
Wow.
And then it stopped. And so, like, I don't know what it was. I don't know if I've ever had it tested or anybody had it tested. To me, it was interesting. If it came back as something known, I would be happy. I think I would be happy to know, oh, okay, that's what I recorded, right? As opposed to, hey, I just had this vocal in exchange with something that could literally rip my limbs apart.
Well, whenever it comes to vocalizations and other items that we'll be talking about, I want people to try and understand something. You would think it would be a big deal if you sent a university a recording of something roaring out in the woods and they're like, yeah, we can't identify this. But they don't really have any interest in it. They don't really, generally speaking, they don't want to have anything to do with it because they definitely don't want to be attached to it if it's Bigfoot or anything else for that matter that falls into the cryptozoology realm because they're, everything's on the line for them. Right. It doesn't bode well for the future of their profession.
Lose a lot of alumni money that way.
Yeah. So there's going to be multiple items on this list. Vocalizations being at the top of things that have been sent to universities, been sent to laboratories and everything else where they were not able to identify them. And for whatever reason, didn't care what it was. I mean, the Ohio howl, you brought up the Ohio howl. It's never been identified. The Sierra Sounds has never been identified. The only thing that the Sierra Sounds has is you have this vocalization expert, Scott R. Nelson, a crypto-linguist from the military, huge accreditations.
It's got a language.
And he says it's a language. He says this is real and it's not human. So I would consider it evidence at that point.
Right, me too.
Of something.
Vocalizations have always been very compelling to me because to me that shows that validity that it's a living creature, that it's physical, that it is existing in our realm, and we can collect it. It is evidence we can collect.
Right. Hair and feces samples. You ever collected any poop?
I have found, Glenn was talking about this, I'm sorry, Glenn Baruso, a researcher from Pennsylvania, one of the last episodes we did on Sasquatch Experience. And he was talking about these big gloppy pancake looking craps that they found. And we had found those in the Cook Forest in Pennsylvania, but we never tried to collect it because I didn't want to try to collect these big gloppy freaking turd pancakes. It was rather repugnant, to be honest with you. And I've never tried to. I've never been into the scat business, Matt.
Yeah, not the scat man.
No, I'm not the scat man.
It is a very technical thing whenever it comes to analyzing feces. That makes it incredibly difficult for it to be worth going through the trouble of dealing with that for any reason. I've heard a few comedic stories about different researchers' wives opening the freezer and finding a bag of poop up there. It never ends well. And then you send it off and they're just like, yeah, that's bear, or that's a dog. You don't want that to happen. And the things that are required for anything to actually come of it, I mean, it can be worth it, but it was never worth it in my area. There was never a time. I did spend about 30 minutes looking at a pile of poop only to discern that it was definitely a pile of dog crap that I had been staring at for 30 minutes.
Who do you send it to even? I guess it's maybe now you can send it to Dr. Dissatel. You can send it to Darby Orchid maybe, but we didn't have all those resources back then either.
Right.
You know, you get on the Bigfoot forums, have Bigfoot crap to send somebody who's interested.
Yeah. Now, hair samples is something I have been a part of and gotten some interesting results.
I have sent hair samples to, well, Dr. Meldrum that got lost in the mail. I sent him registered mail. Probably shouldn't put them in an envelope that was addressed from the Keystone Bigfoot Project, but they disappeared en route. No bullshit. That really happened. And they were hairs taken from the same area as the Jacobs photo. Now, the problem is I think the Jacobs photo creature is a bear. But it was hair taken from that area that we sent anyhow, just to have it tested. Dr. Meldrum said he'd look at it. That's the only time I've collected hair samples. And one of the things that we try to do here in our group is try to learn how to do our best job at preserving that kind of evidence.
This group of people that I used to research with, I was not there whenever the hair was collected, but it was collected near the same casino that's famous for having a Bigfoot video that nobody's ever seen, but certain individuals saw security footage of a Bigfoot. Years later, a group of friends of mine went there just to investigate the area and found hair attached to a barbed wire fence at the back of the property on the opposite side of some dumpsters. The dumpsters were just a few feet away from the barbed wire fence. The dumpster lids faced the opposite direction of the barbed wire fence. The point is there would be no reason for a person to be back there, but not impossible because it was at dumpsters. So at the time, the hair was split into 3 different samples, I believe, and sent to 3 different laboratories. They were sent by a man named Tal Bronco. You may or may not have heard of him back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And we got results back from 2 of the labs. One of the labs never got the sample. Lost in the mail.
Funny how that happens.
The 2 other labs, now keep in mind, we were just going for basic identification through microscopes. No DNA. The results that they sent back stated that they could not determine what race or region of the body that it came from, but it was most similar to human hair, but did not show signs of shampoo use or chemicals or anything like that. So
it was natural.
It was natural. Yeah. So someone who's never washed or dyed their hair was behind these dumpsters and got a huge matted clump of hair on the barbed wire fence. But it was interesting that they couldn't tell us the race or the region of the body. Apparently, hair coming from different areas of the body is different. The hair on your head is different than the hair on your arm. And different things that they look at in hair color, they can usually determine, one of the major races or whatever. And they were just unable to, apparently. Again, most likely human. So take that for what you will. But there's been many hair samples that have been looked at and studied and everything else. There's been entire collections that are believed to be Bigfoot hair, where these hairs do not match anything in the known animal record, including humans.
This is where it gets dicey, right? Because what's to say it wouldn't appear to be almost human? We don't know. How close do they share genes with us?
Right.
And that's where it gets even more kind of kooky and conspiratorial and sketchy and scary, right? Like, are they just a split away?
Well, I mean, I do not have, due to controversy, I do not have any DNA on this list. I do not have any DNA studies on this list. There have been DNA studies,
Right.
but for years we've heard different DNA studies coming back as human contamination. Well, why are you saying human contamination exactly? Is it because you found 100% human DNA, or you found something where you think this must be contaminated because it's close to human but not quite? And then if these things are human of some kind, what would that DNA even look like if there's nothing on the record to compare it to?
And I think that's where we're at, Matt. Like, that contamination leads to that gray area, right? That was it intent, was it accidentally contaminated, or is it not contamination at all? And it's just that damn close.
Yeah.
Which freaks people out more.
No, for sure. For sure.
I don't think we want something to be that close to us. I think we've enjoyed the privilege of being the apex predator on planet Earth, right? And now that you've got something that could be so close to us and be a lot more secretive and secluded, it makes a little pit in all our stomachs kind of become a rock.
Well, at that same location on those same dumpsters, we ran across these handprints that were much larger than the largest male individual in the group that was there at the time. The fingers were much longer than a human finger. The thumb was extremely long compared to a human thumb. The distance between the pointer finger and the base of the thumb was much longer than what is on a human's hand. There were side-by-side photos taken. And in these handprints and fingerprints that were on this dumpster, it left some sort of residue, and it was almost like it had been baked into the metal of the dumpster by the sun over the years. I'm not saying these were like fresh handprints or anything, but in some of these handprints, you could see dermal ridges. And there have been fingerprint experts, Jimmy Chilcutt, back in the day, who have looked at various Bigfoot handprints and fingerprints and said these are showing dermal ridges of something that's not human, and they're definitely real. They're definitely dermal ridges. They're not fake. So I consider that a form of evidence.
Right. Now we have David Zigan out there who's expounding on a lot of those things that, through his work in forensics, that's bringing it even more to light now. And again, I think that's another direction we could go to start getting ourselves some definitive proof. Do we need a body at this point anymore, Matt? I think the body is the ultimate definition. But if we get enough through these ancillary methods of evidence collection, is it good enough? Have we ever determined a species that way?
I've always argued that we have to have a body. And I'm just now starting to reach the point where I think maybe we don't. Maybe, just maybe, society has changed enough and technology has changed enough that we're not going to need a body. And I honestly think about, UFO disclosure again. People are so accepting that we're not alone in the universe, more so than they've ever been as a whole. You've got, the government looking into it and talking about it openly.
Which I think from all that we can infer that there are unidentified flying objects, unidentified aerial phenomena.
Right.
And that they are from out of this world.
Right.
I don't think upon it watching any of these, and we're not even talking about this, but we'll go there now, that any of these congressional testimonials, they don't even try to be coy about it.
No.
In fact, the thing I hate the most is when they go to that mention, we can't talk about this anymore here, but we could talk about it in a closed session. Because just talking about it enough is not obvious that you guys are so close to, admitting, or you are admitting that they're out there. Why can't we do the same with Bigfoot?
Well, that's the thing. This is obviously, in my opinion, headed down the path of acknowledgement. It's never been a question for me, but who cares what I think? But this is going to be an accepted thing, and they're certainly not going to bring in the body of an alien to prove it. They're not going to say, oh,
Right.
well, where's the body? We need the proof. No.
With UFOs, you can go the national defense route, right? Or the global
Right.
defense route. Like, we have to be able to protect ourselves from X, this, and other. And obviously, this technology is far superior than us. We have to look at this as a threat. And because of that threat, we need to keep the information we have under wraps so we can be best prepared. So, whatever. With the Sasquatch, think about the implications it has to the economy when it comes to not even science, just the economy. You have now an endangered species with an unlimited range in North America. What does that do for forestry? What does that do to the paper business? What does it do to fracking and natural gas? Like, now we have an endangered species with an unlimited range in all these areas. Does that shut down industry because of our own laws we've created? And what's the economic impact on that? And then how does that impact us in every day? And that's not even having to go into the religious implications or anything else.
Should we even throw it off the table? I mean, like you were saying, if this is human, or if this is something close to human, what implications does that have? If it falls outside of the realm of just an animal, no offense to animal lovers out there or anything, but now you're talking about, okay, well, do they have rights? Are our treaties null and void with the Native Americans? You know, who was here first?
Right.
Are they part of the Native Americans? You know, there would be a lot of questions that would get asked in a hurry.
How do we pay reparations to Sasquatch?
Right.
You know, like,
I mean, they would
you know,
definitely have rights to land, the same constitutional rights that everybody else has. Take that for what you will, but like, how would the government even be able to respond just to the public outcry and the questions that would come up?
or it becomes, as you've known this has obviously been a public safety danger. And how long have you known this and acknowledged it and allowed us to live
Oh, yeah.
in close proximity, particularly because we have things like missing 401, which scares the hell out of people. And if it turns out this has all been for some Sasquattle that have been, thugging and bugging our people out there, then we have a whole nother set of problems. Again, it spirals out of control. And I think that's why the benefit is to deny, because we don't have to deal with those problematic things right now.
Right.
Like, we talk about the things that that are real everyday issues that we can't control. And now we want to throw something at it like this public disclosure of Sasquatch being real or extraterrestrials and UFOs, which I think they've done that low key, acknowledged it in a way.
So that brings us to body and hand impressions. And I have this on here. Yeah, I have this on here because I think it's important to acknowledge that whenever it comes to the Bigfoot footprint track casting card being played in the world of Bigfoot evidence, you also have to acknowledge that there are castings and findings of other impressions in the ground besides feet.
Right. I have a knuckle print from, I think it's a Paul Freeman knuckle print that I have. And there's handprints out there. Cliff's Museum has a whole bunch of other interesting prints on display. To your point, Matt, there are more than footprints. We have the Skookum cast, which, has its own kind of controversy in itself. Is it an elk wallow, so on and so forth. But it's interesting. There's the potential Achilles heel, like a lot of information in that cast, but the handprints themselves, how do you fake that?
Yeah. I've seen handprints. I've seen some really impressive castings of handprints. I've seen a body cast similar to the Skookum cast, except it was here in Oklahoma and it was smaller in nature, but it did not have the same characteristics as the Skookum cast. You could see, in my opinion, what appeared to be two butt cheeks where it sat on the ground. You could see an elbow and a forearm, and you could see part of a palm where it pressed down on the ground and, got itself to its feet. So I mean, I wasn't there to study the track itself. I only saw the casting, But like you're saying, there's lots of handprints out there, hand castings. There's all different kinds of body impressions that Bigfooters have found over the years, not just footprints.
Right. I mean, and when you couple that with, and I don't know if this is on your list or not, the potential nesting sites, yeah, why not? Like these things need shelter. These things need to find some way to rest or relax like we do. Why would they not leave an impression on the ground? Why would they not have a bed or a home?
It's funny that you bring up nesting sites because just recently, again on the internet, someone had posted an image of a bear nest that they had found, and they saw the bear exit the nest, a small black bear. I don't believe the larger bears make nests or utilize ground nests of any kind, but black bears definitely do. And they took a picture of the nest. They had never seen one before, and they posted it on the internet. And people started comparing this to the nesting site that the Olympic Project has studied. I know that they're not necessarily the only ones that have ever studied a potential Bigfoot nest, but I thought it was interesting because apparently people know about the nesting site that the Olympic Project has studied, but they haven't taken the time to look into any of the research and study that they've actually done on the site. They just know about its existence. And so I had made a post about how, yes, bears do in fact make nests. However, the nesting site in question, they were aware of that fact, and they've done the best they can to rule that out. They've had primatologists come out. They've had wildlife biologists come out and look at the site and look at the nests and everything. And they're different than what bears use. And they're much larger than what bears use. And there was other evidence, such as, the footprints and handprints and things like that. And it surprised me because the response wasn't what I was expecting. The response was, bears don't make nests. I've been a hunter for 40 years and I've never seen a bear nest. What are you talking about? Bears don't make nests. You don't know what you're talking about. And I was just like, okay.
Surprise,
so
surprise, pal.
Yeah, now we're just going to die on that hill trying to defend the Bigfoot nest whenever I'm not even arguing against the Bigfoot nest.
Right. Well, maybe you've just been a shitty hunter for 40 years. Anybody ever think of that?
I mean, I've never seen a bear nest either. But they exist. That doesn't change the fact. And I was just like,
well, sometimes they're opportunistic, right? They'll sleep under porches and make a den. Why would they not do that with an already established semi-structure?
Right.
We're not saying they're ripping the trees off and making them. They're saying, they're usually, if I'm not mistaken, you can correct me, using the shelter that something else has created.
Right. Or, a bale of hay and they just kind of wallow it out or whatever.
It's not like we're saying they're ripping them off trees and weaving these things. That's not what's being said, right?
And in the photo that was posted of this particular nest, it honestly looked like a bale of hay that had been dragged out there or something. But the tree that it was right next to, it was like at the base of a tree, had bear claw scratches all over it where it had been digging in the bark and stuff. I mean, there was obvious signs of bear activity. But it's just interesting that people will really just defend anything blindly without actually knowing what they're talking about.
Well, context is king.
Yeah.
And when they miss the context, they just want to argue about, whatever happens to be the foremost on their mind. And like to your point, I'm not defending this and saying it's not a Bigfoot nest. I'm telling you, I know it's a bear nest.
Yeah.
Because here's evidence A, B, and C. Oh, and a damn bear ran out of it.
Well, it just kind of always takes me back. I don't know. Maybe I had a different approach whenever I was investigating out in the field, but my whole thing that I've pushed for years is if you're going to investigate an area, you have to research that area. You have to learn all the wildlife, all the things that are supposed to be out there, the sounds they make, the foods they eat, the way that they go about their day. You have to learn all that stuff so you can recognize what doesn't fit, what's not supposed to be there. And people just, I don't understand how you can go out and call yourself a Bigfoot researcher or a field investigator whenever you don't even know what animals live in your area or what their behavior patterns are or what their tracks look like.
So it just goes to, I just received a sighting report from a friend of my uncle who's been works out at water authority land. Okay, it's private land. You can't go out there under penalty of trespass. Like, they keep it pretty serious out there. It's a main water source for the community. And he was out there doing his rounds because he works there, and he had a sighting of a Bigfoot. Hands down to him, there's no doubt in his mind what he saw. There's bears out there. He knows there's bears out there, but he knows what the damn bears look like, and he know how this thing moved. But he could eliminate it because he knows what's out there, right? He knows what he saw, and what he didn't see. What he saw was not a bear. So how do you argue that? Again, it's the same thing you're talking about. Like, you've been out there, you've worked out there for over 20 years, you spent out there, the creatures and so to our point, like, it works in the pro way as well as the con.
Right. Down in Sulphur, this is a location in Oklahoma, Sulphur, Oklahoma. It's a small town. And next to this small town is the one and only actual national park in the state of Oklahoma. This is where I had my initial sighting and where I did the vast majority of my Bigfoot research. At one of these locations, there was a group of us. We were going down mid-morning. I think it was about 10 a.m. It had rained the night before. It was, I want to say, late September. Late September. I don't think we were into November yet. It was a pretty cool day. I would say low 50s. I was wearing like a hoodie and pants, and I had to stop at the store and get some medicine on the way. Everybody else was driving on out there. I stopped and got the medicine. I got out there maybe 5 to 10 minutes after they did. Chaos, absolute chaos. Couldn't find anybody. Eventually saw somebody walking in the creek bed. Went down to the creek bed. There's tracks everywhere. My friend had gone up creek following the tracks. He had seen one. He was running towards the direction he had seen it. I went towards where he was. He met me coming back. We turned around, started following the tracks. He was showing me where he had tracked it to. The tracks went up this huge embankment that we had to like crawl up. This thing just stepped up the embankment. There's like a little dirt turnaround there. And you can see the wet footprints from the creek bed in the dirt of the road as it crossed the road and jumps off this little ledge back off into the woods. The other tracks went on the opposite side of the creek and turned and went through the mud and up into this cane thicket, kind of like bamboo. There was one set of tracks that was about 14 inches long, another set of tracks that was about 12 inches long, another set of tracks that was like 7 inches long, and a set of tracks that were like 5 inches long. All barefoot in this creek bed, fresh tracks, late September, 50 degrees outside, horrible conditions. Nobody's going to have their little kids out there running around barefoot in this creek bed. The particular creek bed had a lot of what we call shell in it, a type of rock that will just like cut the crap out of the bottom of your feet.
Cut your feet up.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
And there's no signs of vehicles or anything. And I mean, I'm not considering myself the greatest tracker in the world, but I'm pretty decent. I know what I'm looking at. And I mean, there's just tracks everywhere. There are at least 50 or 60 tracks. We could track them all the way. They would like walk in the water. We tracked them all the way back where they came out of the woods by the lake. We spent all day casting. I still have several of the casts here at the house all these years later. And that was one of the most exciting events that ever happened in my Bigfoot career, being part of that huge trackway find. which is what I want to talk about. Trackways. We don't just find one footprint. Sometimes we find a mile's worth of footprints. Sometimes we find 50 to 60. The London trackway, 122 prints. There's a lot of trackways out there that don't really get that much attention, and I think they're like a huge deal because we have so much information and data that we can learn from them.
Was the London trackway inevitably proven to be a hoax, or?
I don't know if it was ever proven.
Right. I know it was suspected, and
Right.
I think Cliff, I'd have to ask Cliff, to be honest with you, because, oh, here we go. We're going to sound uneducated, Matt, but it's so hard to keep track of these things sometimes.
But there's other tracks besides that. There's other trackways besides that. Like I said, the one that I was a part of definitely wasn't a hoax. It was either Bigfoot or a feral family of humans that live out in the middle of the woods.
Which, as much as we don't want to admit, is a potentiality, but that's scarier than the reality of Bigfoot.
For sure. But yeah, trackways. I know there's another trackway. I don't really have any information on it. Cliff looked into it. It's like Biscuit Ridge or something in the Appalachians. I know there's one outside of Seattle that Dr. Bindernagel looked into and was a part of. There's been several discoveries of trackways over the years, not just single footprints like everybody on the internet seems to believe that you only find one footprint. You might only see one casting because that's the only one that was worth casting, but that doesn't mean that's the only thing that was there.
Right. It's not uncommon.
No.
It's not uncommon to find many footprints. We've talked about this several times, you and I, and, again, folks following footprints until they end and they just stop.
Mm-hmm.
And why? That's another question, right? Like, why? Why do they just stop? And that gets a little wooish at times.
Well, it's such a difficult question to even take on if you weren't there at the time of the incident, because you don't know who investigated it. You don't know, did the tracks disappear, or did the substrate just harden and they didn't leave impressions anymore? Or did they jump up and grab a tree limb and crawl up a tree? There's a lot of variables that could take place before we get to the point of the tracks just vanished. But then there are situations where people who were very knowledgeable and really did know what to look for have said the tracks just stopped, just out of nowhere.
They just ended.
Yeah.
And you can't quantify after that.
So these three things I have lumped together. There might be more, but this one's going to get kind of tricky. Limb formations, tree knocks, and rock clacking.
I don't know. Tree knocking. Somebody wants to take credit for tree knocking, that it was discovered by them. I'm not going to say their names. But, there's been reports of that going back. Now when we go back and we look at some of these historical reports, we can identify that as an activity happening. Rock clacking and the limb formations, I just don't know. Until we see one break it and point it off. What do they mean? I mean, I knew Tom Lancaster. He was a researcher back in the mid 2000s who was trying to study and map them. Did these tree formations and these structures, did they actually have meaning? Did they lead somewhere? Were they the proverbial Bigfoot highway? And, to me, unfortunately, with these things like that, you can go mad trying to discover a pattern.
Right.
They're interesting, but until we see them move them, it's hard to say what's not natural, what's not a natural formation. Nature is strange. I've seen this gigantic at one of the East Coast Bigfoot conference, this gigantic tree twist that was brought in to show everybody, and it must have weighed 1,000 pounds or so. And they bring it in on this rolling cart, and to me, it looked like it was done by a microburst.
Yeah.
And you probably know which one I'm talking about.
Yeah. Sure.
And until you see something create that, it's really hard to even want to speculate on what could cause it when there are many different alternatives to that. The tree knocking, The rock clacking, that's behavior we see in other primates. That's not unusual. So to think that would be part of the Bigfoot behavior would definitely be an assumption I would go with.
I put these three things together because we don't have the visual of what's making the sounds or making the limb formations. I've personally seen limb formations that I could not figure out how they could have been created by nature. That doesn't mean that they weren't. I just couldn't figure it out. I've seen trees bowed over. Don't get that mistaken for a tree bow, but a tree that was pinned underneath a log that didn't seem to have fallen there naturally. It seemed like it had been moved in and it was holding the other tree down. And whenever you move the log, the tree basically sprung back up as much as it could. I've seen X formations where the two limbs were stuck into the ground at the bases. Again, that doesn't mean that that couldn't have happened naturally. I don't know. What I do know is that you do find similar formations in different areas across the United States, in areas that reportedly have Bigfoot activity.
Yes.
That doesn't mean that Bigfoot's making them, but that's the case. Tree knocks, rock clacking, these are things that have, again, been recorded, witnessed firsthand. We don't know what's making the sounds, but it's interesting to me in the sense that nobody's disputing that the sounds are made. They're just disputing what is potentially making the sounds.
Has there ever been a sighting report of a Bigfoot being observed tree knocking?
I mean, I'm sure somebody has talked about it on a podcast.
But that would mean I'd have to listen to all of them. I ain't got
Right,
time for that.
right.
I just, to me, you'd think that would stand out.
Yeah.
Right. You'd think that would stand out as a pretty predominant. So, folks, if you're listening, send us your email.
Yeah, for sure.
To BigfootCrossroads@gmail.com. And
yeah, thanks.
and tell us that yes, it's here, so because I want to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, I know that there's the new theory that it's a vocalization, and then there's the theory that it's them chest slapping. What I have heard out in the field was definitely wood against wood. There was no mistaking it. And I've had people try to fool me. I've had people send me recordings. Owls will slap their wings together. And I've had people send me recordings of that and ask me, is this what you heard? And I was like, no, that sounds like leathery or fleshy kind of. That's not the right sound. And turns out they were trying to trick me. So,
which is discernible, right?
Yeah.
You can tell the difference of a chest slap to a tree beat to a, it is differential. You can tell. There's kind of like a wetness to a sound when you're slapping a flesh. You know what I mean? Like a
right. It's definitely a different
fleshy
tone. Yeah.
Right.
Next on the list, even though they said other than footprints, I had to put footprints.
We're going to tie it back up with the bow.
Yeah, we're going to put the bow on it because, man, there's more to the footprint stuff than I think people actually realize.
Well, there's such a diversity in it, right? Like, just like human feet. If they all looked like the Ray Wallace tracks, I would say, yeah, footprints are the world's biggest hoax, right? But the Ray Wallace prints, we know they were used to fake footprints around the construction sites.
Right.
But that doesn't mean every other footprint that was found in Northern California or across the United States was done by Ray Wallace. That's just stupidity. But there is diversity of these footprints. But then also, when you look at some of the prints that have been found in different areas across the United States that Dr. Meldrum has been able to identify, what is it, the Onion Mountain print?
Yeah.
That, it was found there and then found somewhere else to show very similarities in the print. That's interesting. And to me, that shows, maybe that, we're able to determine some pattern and identity in some of these beings. It's fascinating because there is a lot. You talk about dermal ridges and you talk about mid-tarsal breaks and biomechanics and locomotion. The feet really are one of the bigger proponents to the evidence of the mystery.
Oh, for sure. And again, this goes back to knowing and doing the research about different aspects that can be tied into this, and tracking and foot impressions and how feet interact with different substrates. These are all key elements to looking at tracks, because whenever it comes down to it, if you know what to look for, I don't believe you can really be fooled by a hoax. And we have definitely found footprints out there and cast them and had experts study them that could not have been hoaxed. Just plain and simple. They weren't hoaxes.
Today's folks may not understand the difference in the arguments that used to happen by casting artifacts and determining whether an artifact in the casting could create dermal ridges.
Right.
Like there was a lot of argument going on in that in the early to mid 2000s about, unintentionally creating some of these artifacts in these footprint castings, which were, whether it was, the finite striations in the volcanic ash, if it was really dermal ridges, so there were some really good arguments that were happened back in the day, and they were tested, and people went out and tried this stuff. And I don't know, I guess we were just lucky to be a part of that at that point in time, being able to see that stuff happening firsthand.
I mean, they're not common in general, but there's been plenty of tracks that have had dermal ridges, that have showed sweat pores, even that have been, looked at under a microscope. Dermal ridges are really interesting whenever you recognize patterns in dermal ridges that already exist in known primates in these tracks. Whenever you find a footprint in Oregon and the dermal ridge spacing is the same spacing that it is in all primates, how do you come up with an explanation for that? People talk about the potentiality of people using latex molds of some kind and then like enlarging them to create the dermal ridges, but even then, if you enlarged the dermal ridges, you enlarge the spacing as well, and that's not the case in these tracks. The dermal ridges themselves are larger than a human or any other known primate, but the spacing stays the same, ratio that it's supposed to be. The sweat pores are the same. The valleys between the dermal ridges are rounded, not sharp edged like you would have if somebody had taken some sort of instrument, for instance, and like carved the ridges out themselves. And these are some of the differences that you would look at to determine if it was just casting artifacts like you were talking about, which has been studied ad nauseum.
To say nothing of the fact it's enough to capture the attention of people from law enforcement and science to take their time and their efforts and their knowledge and try to apply it to use it to help us document that this being is in existence. Like it's good enough to convince people of that background. Mm-hmm. That's telling in itself.
I'm not just trying to promote this group. I have no skin in their game, so to speak. But the North American Wood Ape Conservancy.
Yeah, NOAC. Good group of people.
Yeah, they've done a tremendous amount of scientific study and provide all the data and all their research on their website where anybody can look at it. And I think they do a tremendous job. I think they've kind of set the bar whenever it comes to how a group should present their evidence.
100% agree with you.
I just took a couple of excerpts off of their website, as a matter of fact, about some footprint studies that they have done. And I'm going to read that. Thus far, every specialist who has examined these casts agrees that their detailed anatomy has all the characteristics and appearances of being derived from an imprint of primate skin. These now include 30 police fingerprint workers, mostly
30.
From the western states. 30, not just one, 12 of whom might be considered experts. Also included are 6 physical anthropologists with expertise in this area, as well as 4 pathologists and 2 zoologists. At present, 2 of the police experts are willing to state categorically that the prints actually represent the existence of a real but unknown animal, regardless of the implications. Interestingly, these 2 are not only among the most highly qualified, They are also the two who have studied the material more thoroughly. Even the strongest critic, a mammologist at the Smithsonian Institute, agrees that the casts represent primate skin, but he thinks that it must have been transferred from known animals by silicone rubber casting and combined somehow to form the tracks. His examination of the casts were brief. Another strong critic, a leading medical authority on skin in the Pacific Northwest, also agreed that the impressions were undoubtedly of primate friction skin, but left open of the question of how they came to be located on these tracks. So a person from the Smithsonian and another person with a medical background of some kind are the strongest critics to this particular track study. And even they say, yes, this is definitely primate skin. We just don't have an answer of how it came to be. We don't believe it's real, but we don't know how it happened.
That's a strong statement.
That's a strong statement. So the research is out there. The peer review is out there. It's not just Bigfooters saying this evidence exists. It's qualified experts that have examined this stuff, and it's held up to scrutiny. So even if it's just a large footprint, some of those large footprints are pretty amazing evidence in support of this thing actually existing.
Agreed. I mean, hands down, it's not called Bigfoot for nothing. That was such a bad delivered line. It's not called Bigfoot for nothing. But I mean, think about it. I mean, the footprints that started this whole question and the whole reason we did this show tonight. Is there anything more out there than just the footprints? But even from the footprint itself, what more does there need to be except the body? And we're actually able to discern so much from this footprints now. We're able to tell so much more from the footprints than we are from any freaking video. That's what's funny.
And we haven't even talked about the history, the global history since the beginning of time all over the planet of stories and folklore of these creatures existing. People were talking about these things being there long before we ever got here.
Yeah. I mean, in about every culture, there's something like a Sasquatch.
Every culture, the witnesses themselves, myself included, come from all different walks of life. Doctors, police officers, scientists. So I think the witness record should be included as evidence at this point.
Right. I mean, it's just like anything else. It's to what degree of evidence does that serve? To convince a jury, you have to do it beyond a shadow of a doubt. Not a reasonable doubt, a shadow of a doubt, right? Like, I mean, you're talking about people get put away for life based on witness testimony that's enough to convince a jury or a judge. And we have just as good of evidence in that realm for Sasquatch. We just don't accept it because it fits outside the realm of what we as a society deem to be real because we don't look at it through the right lens.
All right. I think that about wraps it up, man. I don't want to beat this horse anymore. I appreciate you jumping on here and covering all these different topics under the umbrella.
Always a good time.
Yeah.
Always a good time to hang out and talk, Matt. And, I think the one thing I want to stress to the listeners is you and I aren't experts. We're just two guys that love to talk about Bigfoot, and we have our different experiences and different beliefs and different levels as we've talked about what we both consider to be evidence. But we just gave you our reasons why we think that, is the evidence good enough or not? And at the end of the day, Matt, I guess to frame a bow on it for myself, I think the evidence is overwhelmingly positive to the effect that there is something out there we collectively call Bigfoot. Whether anybody wants to believe it or not is surely on them. But I think if we had to convince a jury of it, we would be probably more successful today than we would have ever been in the past.
Tell everybody where they can hear the Sasquatch Experience.
No, you can go to sasquatchexperience.com and click all our social media links, Facebook, Instagram, X, formerly known as Twitter. And you can find me everywhere at Sean Forker. I don't hide behind a pseudonym. I'm me. I'm pretty easy to get a hold of. And I do like talking to people. I know sometimes I might sound like I come across as antagonistical. Matt, you can vouch. I'm really not. I just I love the subject and I get a little passionate about it.
I think we all do, man. That last episode you did with Glenn was a good one.
Oh, thanks. Glenn was. I have yet to find somebody else that could tell a story as good as Glenn.
Yeah.
He had all of us enthralled last night listening to him recount his story. And I'm not saying it to get people to go listen, but honestly, I think Glenn is. Whether I agree with him wholeheartedly about what he believes in Bigfoot is not the question. The point is the guy could tell a story, and man, did he tell some good ones last night. So.
Yeah, well, I'll say it. Go check it out, the Sasquatch Experience. You can find it right where you find Bigfoot Crossroads. You can find it on YouTube. Hit the subscribe button while you're there. Do me a favor. We need to get the Sasquatch Experience more subscribers on YouTube.
Yeah, let's get some good research out there and some good. That's the one thing that I think I try to separate, Matt, as you do here. We used to say back in the day, support great research. We still do research. We get boots on the ground to get out there. It shows an outlet for us to talk about some of our findings, but also talk to all the cool people in the field. It's a great time.
Awesome group of folks.
Except James Baker. Love you, JB.
And if you've had your own run-in with Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Dogman, or anything else you can't explain, you'd like to share that story, send me an email at bigfootcrossroads@gmail.com. Check out the website, bigfootcrossroads.com. You can find links to social media, past episodes, merchandise, everything you need, all in one place. And until next time, remember, there's something in the woods.